welcome back for the second part of our podcast. We're still sitting here with Kent and with Sagar. And in the second part, we want to focus on what is new in integration, and especially around AI, because there is a lot of things going around with AI. We do have a few questions for you, Kent.
So I think to start with, how does Logic App team or Microsoft Integration Services team is taking up AI into consideration? So what will happen? What had already happened? What is around AI in this integration domain?
Yeah, lots going on with AI for sure. So the way we look at this from a Logic Apps perspective, and some other teams might look at it similar, but kind of like three different buckets that we're focusing on. So the first bucket would be reshaping business processes. The second is optimizing operations. And then the third is improving developer productivity. So let me start with reshaping business process first. So we recently introduced a new capability called Agent Loop. And this allows you to go ahead and create an agent in Logic Apps. And so the question is, okay, what is an agent, right? And so agent, I like to look at it as more as like an architectural pattern than it is kind of a product. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where it allows you to go ahead and focus on more of a goal-oriented or objective-oriented approach to solving a particular business problem, given a large language model and giving a set of tools. And so the difference here is that historically when we've built workflows, whether that's in BizTalk or Logic Apps or kind of you name it, we have these like deterministic steps as part of our business process. So step 1, we do this. Step 2, step 3, step 4. And it runs in that manner every single time. And from a lot of use cases, that's great. That works. That gives you predictability, which we love as integrators. We don't like uncertainty. We want consistency, right? The problem is that sort of limits what we can do. And when you get into some of these use cases where there's maybe a little bit of ambiguity, or there's a little bit of like change or flexibility required, it gets difficult because we can't predefine or pre-code all of those different paths. So this is where Agent Loop comes into the mix, right? So this is a new type of workflow. Like you go into a Logic App standard instance, you click on add, and you're gonna have like 3 options. Stateful and stateless, which exist. Mm-hmm. And then we've got this new one, which is of type agent. That's gonna drop an agent loop component on your actual design surface. And you have the ability to choose a trigger of your choice. And then within the agent loop component, we're gonna go ahead and create a connection to an Azure OpenAI model. And once we do that, we'll have the opportunity to create our system prompt and our user prompt. And so the idea here is that's where we lay out all of our objectives in the system prompt and say, you as a particular type of agent, these are the things I want you to do. Mm-hmm. And then I also would say, these are the things I don't want you to do. If there's specific scenarios I don't want you to do, like look up data or share data or leak data, things like that. Then what we need to do is like, okay, in order to solve those objectives, what tools do you need access to as an agent, right? So those tools can be connectors, they can be workflows like child workflows, they can also be custom code components, they can be APIs, and you can kind of name it. It could also be knowledge. And so the idea is like, okay, I want you to go ahead and, make this booking. So what are the tools I have access to go do that booking? So that's where you would configure those, provide a description that then the agent can actually use at runtime to figure out what tool should I call. Now, those tools, even though you're assembling all of them, it's not prescriptive in terms of the order in which they get called. This is where the actual agent can do some reasoning and actually figure out what it should call and when it should call based upon the objectives. Now, what's super interesting about this model is that we introduced a concept called agent parameters. And this feels a little bit like there's some mandatory fields when sending an email, like the address, and maybe subject and maybe body, right? Like let's say there's those 3. So you can create 3 different agent parameters for each of those inputs. Then what actually happens is that as part of your plan or objective, you might say, and when you've got the result, send the booking to this particular person and include a subject of this, and in the body include the itinerary, right? Yeah. So what the model will actually do at runtime is go, okay, the tool's expecting this. I need to go ahead and grab this information from all of this kind of runtime processing data that I have access to and inject those dynamically. So this is a fundamental shift compared to deterministic workflows. If you ever build a Logic App workflow, you know that the token picker will only let you choose tokens that have been previously run. And if there's uncertainty about if it exists, it won't let you pick it. And that's the whole deterministic side of things versus this ability to do more dynamic things. And the large language model will actually like pause, or it might call another tool if it doesn't have that information because it's figuring all of this out at runtime. So this is truly, when we think about loosely coupled solutions, that's a big part of it. So that's kind of bucket one. That's been a big investment. Bucket two is more about optimizing operations. And this is where we've actually introduced a service like as Microsoft called the SRE agent that is going to give you a console that will provide both recommendations proactively, but also a console that you can actually seek advice from. Now, this is very new. This is still emerging. But think of a scenario where we will provide you sort of pre-baked functionality from a Microsoft perspective, but then let you go ahead and enrich it with custom agent loop processes too.
Right.
And this is where you truly can get like the best practices from Microsoft, but then how do you enrich some of those with kind of your own use cases, your own context? And that's, I think, best of both worlds. So that's kind of bucket number two. And then bucket three is like codeful workflows is something we've also recently introduced. Now, what's the direct relationship to AI? So let me double click on this. So codeful workflows are a way to go ahead and build a workflow, but using code instead of like low code declarative functionality.
Yeah.
We will give you the ability to take a low code workflow and transpile it into a codeful workflow, a one-time operation. You can't sort of circle back and go convert codeful back to low code. Now, this just gives customers more optionality. We do know that there's some devs that prefer going codeful, but we want to provide a unified platform to you go ahead and build and orchestrate your workflows. So that's kind of step one. Now, if we think about agents and we think about agent loop, that is now an action inside of Logic Apps. So inside of Codeful, we're going to give you access to all of the connectors, all of the actions. That now includes agent loop. So now you have a single unified platform that allows you to go ahead and build low-code agents, but also codeful agents too. And that's a fairly unique proposition both inside and outside of Microsoft. And once again, just giving customers more optionality. Now, the other thing that gets a little bit interesting about Codeful is that we also have investments in a technology called GitHub Copilot, right? That's integrated into VS Code. You can build Logic Apps in VS Code. So what does this now mean? This also now means that you get an AI-assisted development buddy inside of VS Code that's also going to help you accelerate your development too using these latest AI tools. So those are some of the things kind of we've recently announced and gives you a glimpse of some of the additional things we'll be working on. But that's how we kind of think about AI inside of Logic Apps, is those three distinct buckets.
Great. And on a lighter note, how far are those days when a developer will write that I want to create a Logic App with this feature, and it will present a template, and the developer will just configure the connections and Logic App will be ready.
You get the business requirements, just give it to AI and say,
yes,
create it for me.
So interesting. It's we've done some experimentation with what we would call like NLP workflow generation, so natural language processing workflow generation. And we've had some interesting success with it already. I would say we kind of paused some of those efforts just because we really had to sort of double down on agent loop, and we feel really strongly about that. I do feel we'll probably get to the point where we'll resurface and come back to the NLP. But, it was one of those things where it sounds like a simple problem, but it's actually more complex if you want to do it right. So we've definitely seen scenarios where people can do this natural language thing and they output garbage. And I look at that as, now you've just wasted my time because I have to clean up your mess. Or you've hallucinated and you've actually created your own action that doesn't actually work. So when we were going through our experiment, that was like a core requirement. Like whatever we build needs to be valid you should be able to run it. And we were able to achieve that success. Now, we probably need to like build more complex use cases to see how that would work. But there's some promising early results around that. And what we found was that it was kind of a hybrid approach, in the sense you use the natural language processing to understand customer intent, customer requirements. But then what we did is we actually wrote our own code, because we have the designer. We know how to construct workflows. We know how to connect to the connectors. We know how to consume the Swagger. We then wrote our own code that would instantiate those pieces. So what it ended up was that wasn't a lot of hallucination, because we weren't using AI for that part. And that's
right.
where I think other approaches probably failed, was they were trying to use too much AI, and it was a little bit ambitious, and it led to that, versus more of a hybrid, like leverage AI for its strengths, leverage your more deterministic processes where they make more sense, and then be able to write this. But one thing we did sort of enable was this notion of more of a conversation, because as I'm building this, or as the AI is building this, wait a minute, you didn't include, this particular input as part of your prompt, and that's a mandatory field when I want to use that particular connector. So now, what do you want me to include here? So it's one of those things where if you expect to have a one shot, like one input and generate, it's either going to be super simple that it doesn't provide value, or it's going to fail horribly. And I think that's where you kind of need to think of this as more of a conversation, or I think even more promising is this idea of that you have a spec and you write the spec in a document, and that becomes your source of truth. Because what happens if I want to come back and edit this particular workflow? Where's that context? Like, it's probably gone from the agent itself.
Yeah.
But if you have this source of truth, that I think will lead to more predictability. So I think there's some opportunities there. I don't think I have any firm timelines, but we've done a lot of thinking in this area. And I would say, though, that, probably more like sooner, or sort of more likely to be sooner, would be more of the codeful stuff, where you truly have this GitHub Copilot that's already doing a lot of this stuff already, right? So once our SDK is sort of ingested and aware inside of GitHub Copilot Studio, I totally could expect a day where you do describe it as part of what it's called agent mode inside of GitHub Copilot, and it legit will go ahead and provision a lot of what you're trying to achieve. So that, I feel, is probably not that far away, because like there's so much that's just already exists.
Looks very interesting.
It will be.
And are there already any use cases in which using AI in integration domain, we have significantly improved the outcomes?
Well, so one actually interesting use case, and this is public, so no problem sharing it. There's this company, you might have heard of it, called DocuSign. So DocuSign has created an intelligent agreement management solution. And this is it's basically more than a solution, it's a platform. And this platform is built on top of Azure and includes Azure OpenAI, and actually includes Logic Apps too. And so they saw, and this is one of their public sort of stats, is that one of their customers improved their efficiencies by 70% by using the new platform. Now, if you think about DocuSign, it needs to be able to sort of extract key phrases, key dates, key information from a data source to be able to produce a contract that you can now go ahead and sign. And so it was using LLM to be able to go ahead and do this extraction of information, which is something that AI is great at, right? Now, they use Logic Apps under the hood to do all of the orchestration bits in terms of the business process that's supported underneath the hood. So, but there you go. You've got a real global high-tech customer that's using both AI and Logic Apps to kind of transform their business. And they're seeing benefits for their customers, which is amazing to see.
Okay, that's good use case. And how? So we spoke about customers, business values, how AI will, enhance outcomes, etc. How would it impact integration architects and developers? Like what roles they need to play in now, or what competencies they need to learn, or what they will be doing new, or maybe what they will need not to do at all. So
gotcha.
What will change in their lives?
Yeah, and I think, let me start with, like their role's not going away. So let me start there, because I don't think that's practical. I don't think that's realistic. I would say, though, that people need to be more focused on the business and the business value. I think the days of being kind of the hero of a particular framework, I think those days are probably eroding, right? So I do feel it's more about focusing on business value. And if you think about integration, it is complex by nature. And what's kind of interesting about it is it sort of encapsulates both technology, but also a lot of business domains and a lot of process knowledge too, right? So this is where you definitely want to ensure you understand the process, the goals, and I think you can bring a lot of value of transforming the technical requirements or taking the business requirements and turning that into a technical solution. I don't think AI is going to magically solve that problem anytime soon. But I would say that there's some areas that they should focus on. I think number one is the idea of models. I think models are super important. And this was something that was talked a lot about at Build. And I must admit, I didn't really think about it a ton before I saw this at Build. But it's this idea that models have different specializations and how choosing the right model for your solution is actually super important. There's going to be some general purpose models that are great at certain things, and there might be a cost associated with that. Then there might be other models that are more sort of narrow focused, but are very good at a particular sort of capability that are actually less costly, right? So it's this idea of like using the right model for the job. So I think this idea of using models is super important. Now, what can you do about that? Like inside of Azure AI Foundry, there is a like benchmark that they've recently introduced that shows all of the different models that exist and how they're performing and sort of what their characteristics are. So I think that's a good sort of starter tool. But there's also an agent, of course, inside of AI Foundry where you can go ask for recommendations, right? So this doesn't have to be really hard, but I think it's something that you do need to be focused on. The other thing, is probably a little bit overloaded in some cases, but prompt engineering, I think, is another thing where it is a bit of an art, right? In terms of being able to sort of get the right information out of your model and being able to construct that in the right way. And that's what, as I've been learning more about this and building some solutions with Agent Loop, that's where I found like the tuning of your prompts is super important as well. So I think that's another thing. And then also, governance is important too, right? Like you can't just walk into this stuff, focused on speed without understanding the impact. And that's where you need to think about governance. You need to think about your data. You need to think about, is this data that I can use? Is it classified? Is it internal, private, super confidential? Well, better be careful about like how you want to use that. Making sure that, secrets or like important information isn't leaked. You also need to be sort of well-versed from that perspective too. So I'd say definitely some new skills, some existing skills, but I think you put those together as a package, and that's very valuable for getting the right outcome.
Yeah, it's good to see that the skills that we today as integration engineers have are still usable with AI. The fact that we need to know how the customer works, we need to know where the data resides within an organization, that remains important. Definitely speaking with the different teams within an organization, that is crucial. And then the new things like prompt engineering, I completely agree with you. It's difficult the first times that you're using it to create good prompts, but it's also practicing, and it's to try them out, improve them over time, try new things out. I think that's something we did already as integration engineers, is we're trying to find new ways to solve issues. I think with prompt engineering, it will be the same. We need to try to improve our prompt writing and really exercise.
And what's interesting about that is that, models are changing so fast. And what's super interesting about models is that as they sort of like increment in terms of their versioning, typically they get better, but their cost goes way down. Yeah. And so this is actually one of those incentives of actually like paying attention to models and being able to, hey, a new model is out, let's go test it. Obviously there's a lot of regression testing and you need to think about those things, but it truly is one of those things where you could see significant savings or improvement of accuracy by really changing your one line of config, like changing your model, right? And so this is one of those learnings, I think, over the last year of people that have been more active in terms of maintaining and understanding their model have seen huge benefits. But that's another skill that people kind of need to think about. And the last thing I'll say is, like, you brought up a really good point around, like, as integration, a lot of this business process stuff is not new. And this is where I have a really strong feeling and strong sort of passion towards AI plus integration, because these are things we do today, as you mentioned. This is in our DNA. We think about the business process today, but across multiple systems. And sometimes I must say I shake my head when I see some agent demos, because they're doing some really silly things. And it's more of like, we know the use cases. We have the use cases. It's more of like, we can really contribute here. It's more of just how do we infuse those processes with AI where it makes sense. And we are far ahead of the game. The other thing is you need data to build AI solutions. We know how to connect. We know how to manage. We know how to split. We know how to aggregate. Like, we can orchestrate. Like, we know all of these things. So integration people are in a great position here to succeed. But they need to have the right mindset to sort of be open to these new opportunities and, want to learn sort of how to take advantage of them.
Yeah. So my next question is basically around the consistency, predictability, hallucination, or the errors which AI can make around integration domain only. But I would like to ask that question from two perspectives. So one perspective is that what is Microsoft or Azure is doing to ensure less of hallucination or more confidence in the output or more of consistent output. So is there something which Microsoft is doing? And my second question will be that what we as architect and developers can do, like maybe following some best practices or some patterns, like how to safeguard all these scenarios.
Yeah, and I think they're related. Your two questions are related. So I think number one, it starts with the model. Like, I know hallucinations is kind of the boogeyman, and for rightfully so. But I think even as we've seen these advances in models, we've actually seen fewer hallucinations. Now, I'm not saying that's disappeared by any means, but I almost feel like, given time, this will be much less of a concern than it historically has been. So models will improve that. Now, what can I do to sort of mitigate the impact of hallucinations? There's a couple things. Number one, and I also say this is kind of a progression. Like, as customers adopt AI and are new to it, you should be very sort of focused on this, and you should think about what are the mitigating controls that you can impose or implement to avoid any sort of surprises. Yeah. As you get more comfortable, you can sort of loosen the knob, right? You can dial down sort of some of these constraints. And I relate this back to like RPA, robotic process automation. This is the same playbook in my mind. Like, I saw this a few years ago when I was working on Power Automate Desktop. And it's this idea of like, ooh, I'm not going to let this bot go do the stuff that I used to do myself. And there was things that you would do to get more comfortable with it. You would start with, I'm going to run in attended mode. And I'm going to watch what this thing does. Then I'm going to do, I'm going to switch this to unattended mode. But I'm going to use a human in the loop pattern that allows me to go ahead and sort of check in on the bot, right? Like, before it does anything, say, significant or sort of damaging, I'm going to have it reach out to me and share what it's about to do. And if that looks good to me, I'm going to say, okay. If I say, okay, now what it's going to do is automate the last mile. So I've achieved benefits from a productivity perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm still comfortable because now I've gone ahead and have some oversight and governance around what it's going to do. I would look at agents kind of the same way, right? So there's this mode of, okay, show me your plan and then send it to me through Teams. I'll approve or reject, and then we'll go from there. So that would be something human in the loop. I would consider doing that. Another thing I would consider is this idea, and this comes from Anthropic, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but it's like this idea of the evaluator optimizer pattern.
Yep.
And this is where you can actually go ahead and have AI review the work of AI. So you have one particular like process, could be an agent, could be an LLM chat completions call, that its goal is to construct something or create something. Then you have a follow-up step where you then go ahead and review it. And these are really, if you think about separation of concerns, really important. Like they have distinct jobs. Your job is to create, your job is to review and provide feedback. Now, what ends up happening is like, okay, I create, okay, you're missing this, or this is an issue, go fix. And it goes back in a loop. It tries to do it again, and it comes back and it gets evaluated like uniquely, right? Holistically. Okay, now you're good, let's go, right? So, but if not, stays in the loop, right? So that's another pattern that, you know, customers should implement. And once again, you have control. This is prompt engineering, right?
Yeah.
Do this, do this, do this. It cannot do this. It cannot do that, cannot do that.
Yeah.
And you can sort of build these safeguards into your solutions to sort of reduce the fear from that perspective. I think the other thing is like exposing this data is super important, right? So you review it, could be part of your test cases, could be in business process tracking, if that makes sense. And then it's like tweaking and optimizing. So, you know, that's something you can't forget about either. And then certainly when new models come out, just don't blindly just flip the bit.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead, run your baselines, make sure your objectives are still being met even though the model has changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important because we are talking about AI a lot. It's also to see from, is it really useful to use AI in a specific scenario? Because I do see already coming scenarios where, for example, customers that are today using EDI all of a sudden wants to do it with agent loop. Maybe there, you already mentioned it earlier, maybe not always the best case, because in that case you want predictability.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, you know, I will never just say do agents because it's cool and you want to, you know, what is it, conference-driven development, right? So definitely pick your battles. Like if you need a lot of predictability, consistency, even like transactional throughput, like those are scenarios where it probably makes more sense to stay in a deterministic workflow and then use agents where they exceed, right? Or they excel. And this is idea like, hey, maybe I've got unstructured data, I need to summarize, or hey, you know, there was always this like judgment call that needed to be made. And we always like just put this over to the finance department because they would review it and stuff like that. If you can codify all of like those steps, then it's more of like, well, let AI do that instead of a human, you know, manually doing all of those steps, right? But definitely leverage it for its strengths. And I think from a logic apps perspective, this is super important. Like we're not trying to upsell you on like, hey, this is the magic platform. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg and go for it, right? Like you're in Logic App Standard. You have access to this today. Go build an agent, connect to an AI model, and use it, explore, and, you know, do your POCs, try to get some value. And like, you're going to be able to do this super cheap. Like this is not a whole sort of wild, large investment. You don't need to go do RFPs. You know, you have this, you have access to this. Go see if it works for you, experiment. And then, you know, I'm sure you find it will and it'll provide some benefit. Then you can go do more and make those investments as you see fit.
Right.
Yeah, and you already spoke about agent loops, about SRE agent, about codeful workflows. Are there any other features that maybe people are missing that are now coming into Azure Logic Apps?
Oh, let's see here. So the business rules engine, that recently went GA around build. We also have some updates to integration environment. So the ability to create alert rules for a resource or a collection of resources. There's a few additional reports there too as well. We talked about business process tracking reaching GA. We've also built some first-party integration with Azure AI Foundry too. So obviously we love when you build an agent inside of Logic Apps, but maybe you've built an agent elsewhere and you want to be able to tap into our connectors. We do allow you to call Logic Apps as a tool or Logic Apps as an action from an Azure AI Foundry bot. So if you head over there, you will see that capability exist. We've also introduced the ability to call an Azure AI agent from a Logic App as well. There's a new connector that'll let you do that. So you can use any of our triggers. And you think of this more of an autonomous use case, but hey, new records in SharePoint, new records in Dataverse, new records in SAP, go kick off this agent and pass along some payload. that's another use case as well. We've also introduced a bunch of templates related to ingestion, data ingestion for Azure AI Search, but also for Azure Cosmos DB. So if you want to use those as vector stores, kind of there's this efficient path way for you to go do that as well. So those are things off the top of my head. A data mapper, I think it's fair to mention that. So we're getting pretty close to GA for data mapper. So that's a refreshed UX. I think we had a public preview refresh, I think in late March. So that's something worth exploring as well. And I think that's a lot of it anyways.
It's definitely a lot. I see it for myself as well. I'm around 20 years in the integration business, and only the last years it's going very fast. We're getting new features. I think we never had a moment where so many new things were introduced. How do you see that because not only Microsoft, of course, you see the integration landscape is changing a lot the last years. How are you seeing that?
Well, it is highly competitive. So, there's definitely some other, contenders out there that are doing interesting things. And customers, I think, are really sort of interested in value these days. And it's one of those things where you never want to lose sight of that, because if you don't address the customer value, then there's a probability they'll start looking elsewhere. So we've certainly benefited from some others that not taking care of that, but we don't want to fall into that particular mode. The other thing is at Microsoft, there's obviously been a large push for AI. The Logic Apps team is actually in the core AI platform organization at Microsoft. So there's definitely, as part of our strategy, this idea of how do we infuse AI, in everything we do, right? And obviously where it makes sense and where there's customer value. I think that's kind of the key sort of point there. And so there's definitely expectations around how we are addressing this market. There's a lot of startups that are doing a lot of interesting things with AI and moving very quickly. And certainly our focus is we need to be as quick, because we're not interested in losing mind share or market share. So there's a lot of momentum these days and a lot of expectations that we move quickly and really drive a lot of customer value. So I think that's kind of what's driving this. I'm glad you've seen it. The team's been working super hard. So kudos to them. But that's good to hear.
So we definitely can expect much more new things coming in the coming years to us.
Oh, absolutely. We're not slowing down by any means. It's, if anything, we're just seeing tighter feedback cycles. That's a really important piece for us is how do we get concepts out, get feedback from customers and partners, then quickly iterate and get those to market. I think that's definitely an expectation. I would also say there's an idea that, previews should not last as long as they have historically, and how do we really reduce those cycles? But on the flip side, making sure it has customer value. So I think the idea is there might be some things that don't make it to a preview that previously would, but we've done that early validation with customers before it's even got to that point. So we're definitely working very transparently and open with our partners and customers, sharing early thoughts, sharing early designs, like the NLP workflow generation is an example. And then once we see that something's there, is going and doubling down really quickly. And Agent Loop's a great example of that. That was something that was really seriously kind of explored, I would say probably in February. There's maybe some earlier work done kind of over the holiday break, but once that was validated, we executed on that super quickly. And now that's in public preview. And so that's an example of, how the velocity that we're working on and how sort of focused we are on sort of delivering that customer value.
And I think that was not announced in build. I remember that I was trying out something and I saw that option already of creating an AI agent. Do you know if that is possible? Or
So you just spoiled the tip. So just go to Logic Apps a couple of days before a big event and you'll see all the goodies. So the reality, I know that sometimes people have this perception that, hey, there's a magic button that says deploy this update to all regions throughout the world, and it doesn't work like that. So we do what we call a safe deployment. We've got different regions and different kind of zones, if you will, where we will go ahead and deploy these workloads. And the idea is you kind of like, obviously we've got like our non-prod instances where we deploy to first, but then you kind of go into these lower traffic regions. The idea that, you don't want to break anyone, but if you do, like it's a smaller blast radius, and then you kind of progressively work your way up through the busier regions. And so these are things that does take some time, over the course of like days to happen. So it's one of those things where if we want to time something for a big event like build, it needs to be there in advance. And we generally, there's certain sort of windows where you can make deployments and can't make deployments. So sometimes we're also dependent on some of those schedules, but usually things show up a little bit early so that you can see them and access them on the day that the announcement's made. So yeah.
So you definitely will remember for next year.
So that's some secret
I did not
sauce.
try it actually. So I was doing this hybrid deployment proof of concept.
Yeah.
And I opened the Logic app, created a new workflow, and I saw that option. Of course, I just saw it and I did not paid much attention to it because I was doing something else. But when during the build, I saw the same screen and it clicked to me, I have seen this before, and I immediately went back to my Azure portal and saw, this option is already there.
It's already there.
Yeah.
No, that's a little bit of how the sausage is made. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Thank you for listening to the Integration.Insights podcast. We hope that we inspired you for the future.